It looked disgusting, but it's something people still remember today.
For the time is an issue when we're talking about something that lasts.
The zombies were not the villains.
Welcome one, welcome all to ScreenRant's Challenge My Goat. I am your shepherd through this journey of superlatives, Liam Crowley, and today we are declaring the greatest zombie movie of all time. Our expert today is ScreenRant senior writer, Shaun Lealos. Shaun, thanks for coming by Challenge My Goat. What makes you qualified to declare the greatest zombie movie of all time? And what is your pick?
Well, I've been writing for ScreenRant since 2017, and I've been writing for movies since 2009. So I have a lot of experience. I've watched a lot of movies. I've covered festivals and conventions. I studied film history in college, and it was when I took the history of horror class that I fell in love with horror. And I just love seeing how different genres have changed over the years, especially the zombie genre, going from the Haitian voodoo zombie movies and then George Romero creating the zombies we know today. And that's why my pick is his second movie, Dawn of the Dead, which I believe is the greatest zombie movie of all time, and the movie that is the reason that every other zombie movie since then has the structure they have.
We're going with a goat. We're going with a goat. Only appropriate for ScreenRant's Challenge My Goat. Your challenger today, Shaun, ScreenRant content strategist, Miss Rose Graceling-Moore. Rose, thanks so much for stopping by Challenge My Goat. What makes you qualified to declare the greatest zombie movie of all time?
Thanks, Liam. So much like Shaun, I've been writing about horror for quite some time. I've actually been writing about horror, amongst other things, for over a decade and a half. Over 10 years ago, I was the dedicated zombie writer for a horror site called Horror Honeys. And in that capacity, I actually not just attended multiple Crypticons and horror festivals, but have been a panelist at Crypticon speaking about zombies and zombie movies. This was my bread and butter. For a good few years, I was watching 1 to 4 zombie movies almost every day. I've seen a lot of them. I feel I know them better than it's probably healthy for anyone to know zombies.
Okay, we got 2 experts on the panel today to declare the greatest zombie movie of all time. And there's a lot of things you said in your introduction that I want to pick at when we get to the debate section, but I'll wait until that time comes. Shaun, I want you to kick us off. I want you to lay the foundation for us. You have 60 seconds to tell me why Dawn of the Dead is the greatest zombie movie of all time.
I feel that when George Romero created the zombies in Night of the Living Dead, he created something that was more than horror movies. It was a social commentary. It was a deep social commentary that attacked a lot of issues. But I think with Dawn of the Dead, he magnified that. He had at least 3 that I'm going to mention, deep social issues that he dealt with in that movie that still stands the test of time today. If you look at today's society, you see all 3 of these issues are still prevalent today, are scary today, and helps keep Dawn of the Dead relevant. And I believe that, as I mentioned earlier, if it wasn't for Dawn of the Dead, you wouldn't have most of the zombie movies or TV shows that are around today, because they either copied it or they went against what he did in his movie to create their stories.
All right, with 5 seconds to spare and an argument we're all too familiar with here on Challenge My Goat. If it wasn't for X, we wouldn't have Y and Z. I'm excited to see what else you got for me when it comes to your argument in the debate section. But for starters, Rose, you got 60 seconds to tell me why Dawn of the Dead is not the greatest zombie movie of all time.
Gladly. And with no hate to Dawn of the Dead, it's fantastic. It is a seminal zombie movie, but it's also the most obvious possible choice. It is something that everyone says, based on the same thing you just did, Shaun, that everything wouldn't exist without it. But I think that argument, number one, ignores the fact that if we assume something to be the greatest has to be the thing that the other things wouldn't exist without, Night of the Living Dead would have to be your pick, because one does not exist without the other. The first in Romero's trilogy would have to be that. It also means that we're not putting enough respect on The Last Man on Earth, which is arguably the blueprint for Dawn of the Dead. These are things that are too easily missed because we love George Romero, because who doesn't love George Romero? Because this is a phenomenal trilogy, but that isn't what makes it the best. And there is another movie that stands up significantly better, and it does absolutely everything that Dawn of the Dead does, and it does it better.
What a tease for the debate section, Rose. I don't want to wait any longer. What is your challenger pick?
My challenger pick is Shaun of the Dead.
Oh, okay. Shaun of the Dead versus Dawn of the Dead. This is going to look so good on a graphic on our socials, these two going head to head. Rose, I'll start with you to kick off our debate section here. You obviously went with a pick that was one of my questions here later. How integral is comedy to a zombie movie? For you picking Shaun of the Dead, it has to be pretty important, I would say.
Comedy is important, but I think that when we're talking about the greatest of all time, comedy does something really important for horror movies, which is that Dawn of the Dead is known for the gore and the effects and how amazing they were for the time. However, for the time is an issue when we're talking about something that lasts. Now, in a serious horror movie, the older and the further that from today's special effects those get, the harder it is to take it seriously. With a comedy, age is like fine wine. The worse those effects get over time, the more it feeds into the central comedic point of the film, so the film lasts. And that is something that only a comedy horror can do. And it's not just a comedy. That's one of my other things that I love about this that I think makes it phenomenal. It functions as horror. It functions as comedy. It functions as a buddy comedy. It functions as a romance. It functions as almost every major genre, spare like Western or fantasy. And even then, I could argue fantasy if my life depended on it for that one, because zombies are not real. But this is something that transcends one singular genre, but the comedy element front makes it more accessible, and it means it ages better, which is something that Dawn of the Dead kind of starts to fall down on. The zombies, unfortunately, look like they're cosplaying Kermit at this point, and that's an interesting visual choice that kind of takes away from the serious levels of dread that you should feel when you're watching it.
Shaun, you're making some faces over there. We just gave Rose quite the amount of time to talk. I not only want you to defend your pick of Dawn of the Dead for me, but I also want to see you poke some holes into Shaun of the Dead. Why is Shaun of the Dead not something that you would consider to be the greatest?
It's a hard argument to make. I took my family to see Shaun of the Dead when it was back in theaters this year. It was the first time my wife and son saw it. And I will defend anything Edgar Wright does because he's a genius filmmaker. But Shaun of the Dead has some problems. I mean, when you look at the movie, you see an all-white cast. You see not much diversity. You see more comedy than horror. I mean, Dawn of the Dead had comedy. I mean, it had a pie fight where the biker gang came in and started throwing pies at the zombies when they were destroying them. I mean, he tried to make it as ludicrous as possible. And the one thing that Romero did in his movie is he wanted to make it entertainment first, his social issues second. He expected his audience to understand what he was saying, so he didn't have to hammer home the social issues, and he was an entertaining movie. It wasn't as funny as Shaun of the Dead, obviously. I mean, very few movies are, but Edgar Wright himself had mentioned that he wouldn't have made Shaun of the Dead if he didn't have the utmost respect for Dawn of the Dead. And going back to what she mentioned about the special effects, I have to disagree with that because I feel that the practical effects, they went to a slaughterhouse and bought in-ears from a slaughterhouse and brought them to the set and used them when they pulled out and did the disembowelment. It looked disgusting, but it's something people still remember today. In 20 years, 30 years, are people going to remember CGI effects created in a computer? It was funny, a hole in the middle of a woman's chest that they could see through. But it was created in a computer. It takes you out of the movie because this isn't real. But then you look at the scenes from Dawn of the Dead and you see, they're using reverse filmmaking when they do the axe to the head. They put it there first and then they pulled it out, reverse the filmmaking. It looks real. It still makes you jump. It still makes you think, oh my God, they just put an axe in this guy's head. You don't see that as much at all in Shaun of the Dead, and it takes away from the horror of the movie, which it more focuses on the comedy, the buddy comedy, the romantic side plot, and all of that. It just takes away from the horror, and that makes it a little less of a zombie movie and a little more of a zom-com.
An argument for practical effects. You won't get me pushing back on that argument anytime on Challenge My Goat. Rose, to come back to you, I want to get your nostalgia temp check. It's a question we always ask on Challenge My Goat. Where were you the first time you saw Shaun of the Dead? Is there any influence in terms of the setting, the people you're with, into why it is your goat?
No, I saw Shaun of the Dead when it came out in theaters. And I went to see a lot of movies at the time. Shocker. No one will be surprised. And it was one that I saw in theaters. I think I saw it by myself. And it was phenomenal then. It's phenomenal now. But I want to leap back to something that Shaun said, because he's right that there is less diversity of race in the cast of Shaun of the Dead. However, I will always take umbrage with what Dawn of the Dead does with its one female character. I recognize that for the time, she may have been seen as a strong female character. However, she essentially functions to be the problem. She and her learning how to drive the helicopter, fly it, that's the word, fly the helicopter, is the reason that everything went to shit. Like, she functions almost as an Eve parallel there, which bothers me on a deep level. Not to mention that while the guys are playing cards and hanging out, she is cooking and cleaning behind them. And that is a level for something that is held up for being phenomenal social commentary on other levels. That is a problem. The women in Shaun of the Dead effectively save the day. The men are kind of idiots, and that's a great thing about it. It's an everyman's apocalypse, and the mistakes make more sense. In Dawn of the Dead, the woman is the problem. In Shaun of the Dead, the woman is the solution. It's Yvonne who comes to save the day in the end. And there's a better gender balance in the cast, and there's a better treatment of women in the cast. And that is something that genuinely, as much as I enjoy Dawn of the Dead, will always rankle with me and will always be a problem with me. And I remember when I first saw that, which obviously was not when it came out, unless I aged really well. It was something that I saw as a teenager, and it bothered me then, and it bothers me now.
You know, it's interesting when you look at it, because I was watching the documentary, the making of, and they spoke to Galen Ross, who played Fran. And she had mentioned that in the original script, you know, he wanted her to scream and be scared and be terrified, but she refused. She said, I want to be a strong woman. I don't want to be someone who's going to be a damsel in distress that has to be rescued. I want to stand up, you know, and she was also a pregnant woman, which was very interesting at the time.
So
and I found it interesting.
Better than it could have been does not make
yes, it I agree.
Like, it doesn't make it acceptable just because it's better than it could have been. Right.
And then the two white male characters, Stephen and Roger, you know, they were idiots. You know, they deserved their deaths because they did the dumbest things possible. You know, they were the Nick Frost and Simon Pegg at the time. And it was Ken Foree's character who was, yes, I agree. You know, she didn't save the day. He helped her escape. But I feel that I agree with you. I agree that Shaun of the Dead had a better representation of women. I feel that Dawn of the Dead had a better representation of minorities as a general, as well as dumbing down the white men, which is something that in 1978, you didn't see that very often.
I want to get into some plot specific things before the debate goes too strongly in one direction, because something we haven't really touched about too much is the zombies themselves, because zombies are not only, you know, the reason for the genre, but they're also a plot device. They can also be viewed as henchmen, and every different zombie movie out there takes on different interpretations. What's coming out very recently, or coming out this weekend, I believe, time of release, 28 years later, The Bone Temple, they're rage-filled. They're zombies that can run. They're zombies that might be able to still think a little bit. I would love for both of you to talk about the nature of the zombies within your zombie movies and what makes this portrayal of zombies worthy of being in the GOAT conversation. Rose, we'll start with you.
I think this is kind of a tough question because these are very similar zombies for good reason. They're intended to be. And I think that, I mean, Shaun, I'll let you speak for Dawn of the Dead, but in Shaun of the Dead, the zombies, interestingly, are secondary in a whole lot of ways. The purpose of the zombies exists for social commentary. The reason that Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg wrote in the slow-moving, shambling zombies was not just in homage to George Romero's zombies, but was because the core social commentary of the plot and I want to get into that later because it's another thing that I think is really done better, is about how they kind of miss the beginning of the apocalypse because they just assume that these are drunk people, or predominantly drunk people, or people who are unhoused, who are on the street, and they're not paying attention. And there's an element of not paying attention that is important to the central commentary. But it's also that really it's about the group dynamics. And that's something about zombie movies as a whole. For a horror monster genre, the monsters themselves rarely are the point of the film. They are backdrop to allow the social dynamics to play out, with a few exceptions like 28 Days. But even then, the original 28 Days is all about humans as monsters, which is the underlying driver of the entirety of the genre.
Very much so. Shaun, for you, your categorization of zombies and how they're used both as a plot device and also an element of horror.
I agree with Rose that, in Shaun of the Dead, it was also an approach on the slacker genre. The people who are just going through life and don't have anything. It was similar in Dawn of the Dead. It's one of the things that they mentioned was, why are the zombies coming to the mall? And it's because that's a place of familiarity. They were going to a place that they remembered made them happy. They weren't going there necessarily to kill people. They were just going there because that's where they felt they needed to go, which is interesting that the main characters would also end up there. And when I get to talking a little bit about the themes of the movie a little bit later on, I'll mention more about this, but it seems like it's a place. George Romero's basic criticism was consumerism. Who cares how much you own? Who cares what you have? Who cares about your possessions if you're dead? So none of that means anything when you become a zombie, but yet the zombies still found a way to go back to what they believed made them happy, what they believed was important, even though it wasn't. And just like in Shaun of the Dead, the zombies were not the villains, the biker gang who came and busted in the doors and started tearing everything down and caused all the problems. Those were the villains, and those, they got what had coming to them. And the only reason that Peter and Fran almost died was because one of the survivors turned into a zombie and went to the place that made him feel safe, which was a safe room that they made. Once again, it was the dead trying to find what made them feel secure. And that made them more sympathetic than evil, because they were just trying to get somewhere they felt was safe, but yet they were the monsters. They weren't. In either case, the zombies were not really the monsters.
Rose, I saw you getting ready to speak. Did you have something to say there?
I was going to say, and it's not a direct disagreement to anything you've just said, but it is one of my points as to why I think that Dawn of the Dead is starting to falter in terms of holding up. Everything you've just said relies on a societal understanding of a mall, and a mall being somewhere that people go for consumerism, and a mall being somewhere that makes them happy. I guarantee there will be people watching this, listening to this right now, who have never set foot in a mall and are never going to. The concept of mall culture and malls as a central space for consumerism, it's dying out. It still exists.
But is that going to happen with the pubs?
Well, but the point of Shaun of the Dead is not the pub. The point of Shaun of the Dead is a dull routine that he has work, house, watch TV, go to the pub, blah, blah, blah. It's the dullness and the repetitiveness of his routine. And sad as it is to say, I don't think we're going to reach a point where no one understands the concept that a repetitive routine can zombify to a certain extent. But
at the same time, you would also say that about, buying things, wanting things, going to places where you can get things that can make you happy, even though it's material, which is what the mall represents. Even though, yes, malls are going out, it's still the same kind of thing. You have people wanting to find what makes them feel happy and secure. A mall for them, a pub for Shaun. I think
it's that the mall it's so integral. Mall culture is so integral to the message of Dawn of the Dead. But I think that Shaun of the Dead, it's not just the Winchester. The Winchester is obviously their end location, but it's all the other points first. And it's the routine that is gone through at the beginning and the end of the movie. It ends up at the Winchester in both, but it's not just the Winchester. If you took that out or put it elsewhere, if they ended up at like a gym, it would still have made exactly the same point. Whereas if you had Dawn of the Dead end up in a gym, the point would be gone.
It's tough to poke holes in these arguments, guys. You guys are jousting it out now. We're going to wrap up just about right now with your closing statements. Shaun, for you, for starters, you got 60 seconds to bow tie your argument for me. You can take this in any direction you'd like. I'd love to maybe hear a curveball from you if you have any sneaky argumentative points to make as to why your selection is the greatest of all time. Shaun, you got 60 seconds to wrap us up here.
There are three themes in Dawn of the Dead that I feel are still prevalent today that are important. The movie opens with two talking heads on television arguing, is this real? This isn't real. This is real. This isn't real, while the zombies are attacking them. Watch any television news show today on any news channel, and you'll see the same thing. People saying, this isn't real. This isn't real, while they're out there destroying everything. It then goes to the police who are attacking a marginalized community with Mexicans and Puerto Ricans and killing everyone that they see because they might be a zombie. But what happens? They turn every one of these people into zombies. The police show up and they make everything worse by just making more zombies by trying to get rid of zombies because they don't know what they're doing. And then this leads on to the consumerism arguments. I feel that Romero put so much focus on his themes and trusted his readers or his viewers to see it that it makes it the perfect movie.
A very well argued closing statement. Oh boy, you had me thinking if this movie was made 60 years ago or yesterday, based
exactly.
on how you wrap that one up. Rose, coming to you to wrap us up on your selection of Shaun of the Dead. You got 60 seconds to bow tie it all or throw me a curveball. Why is Shaun of the Dead the greatest of all time?
We're landing on the social commentary because that's a vitally important part of both movies. But what I think makes Shaun of the Dead better is that Dawn of the Dead makes a statement. George Romero tells us what these issues are, makes a clear statement about each of them. Shaun of the Dead asks a question. At the end of it, Shaun has exactly the same routine as he did in the first place. We have consumerized and commodified the actual zombies at the end of that movie, which nods to George Romero's point, but asks a question about if it's good or bad. Shaun has returned to his original routine, and yet now he's happy. So what makes him a zombie and what doesn't? It is a question. It engages the audience, it engages the viewer by asking questions rather than telling someone what to think. And that to me is more valuable. Not to mention, Shaun of the Dead is a star maker. The original cast, most of those have gone on, or they were already going to be big major stars, but they've gone on to become household names. Whereas out of Dawn of the Dead, one of those cast members has more than 8 acting credits since that movie.
A hell of a way to wrap us up, Rose. Thank you so much. That was a good closing argument from both of you guys. I don't know who's going to win this one, and that's why we leave it up to the comments section. If you're reading the article right now at ScreenRant.com, scroll on down to the bottom of the article where you see the comments and drop your selection, whether you agree with Shaun, whether you agree with Rose, or whether you have your own entry to make. There are a lot of great movies from fairly recent memory that I feel like were left on the table here, even though the zombie genre, I feel like thrives right now in television, both with The Last of Us and everything that The Walking Dead has done over the years. A lot of highs, some lows. One that would have been my selection, I Am Legend. I Am Legend. It's fair to call it a zombie movie, right? Like, I know it's a different kind of style.
That is such a contentious point, and I will allow it purely because I like calling The Last Man on Earth a zombie movie, but it like that one, technically vampires.
Yeah,
aren't they based on the same? They're both based on I Am Legend. They're both based on the same story, aren't they?
No, The Last Man on Earth. I'm referencing the original 1964.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
I was going to say, I Am Legend would have been my pick. I'm sure some people will either share that in the comments or heavily disagree because of some minutia as to what qualifies a zombie movie. But anyways, we have 2 comments from last week's episode where we declared the greatest disaster movie of all time, who offered some contrarian selections. First, from Stu. Stu writes, I have never understood the disrespect Armageddon has gotten over the years. It is great fun and exactly why we go to the movies. I'd toss The Day After Tomorrow into the ring. It has a warm heart in the midst of its Arctic blast. The effects are stellar and the cast sells very bit of the tension. The impact of the movie is so visceral and I have to wear a coat every time I watch it. The Day After Tomorrow also would have been high up in my selections for greatest disaster movie. Another selection here from Thomas, who writes, I'm going to have to side with Dante's Peak, I'm afraid. It's the rare disaster movie so scientifically accurate that all but one shot works and has been used by volcanologists to help people in risky areas understand the hazards they're facing. 2 great comments from Thomas and Stu there. I encourage more people to give those comments. Some people just say a selection and they don't say why. Tell us why. Tell us why it's your GOAT selection. Speaking of the future, next week when we read 2 of the comments from today's episode about zombie movies, we will also be tackling the theme of greatest Sundance movie. That is one I'm going in completely blind to because I have only worked Sundance as a festival the past couple of years. I don't really know what makes or doesn't make a Sundance movie. So it'll be fun over this next week to do some homework in the Sundance realm. Rose and Shaun, thank you guys so much for joining me on ScreenRant's Challenge My GOAT. You both gave very well articulated arguments and also came at each other's throats a little bit. Like, thank you guys for going back and forth. We got some contention here on Challenge My GOAT. Rose, to start with you, where can the people find you and what do you got cooking up over on ScreenRant?
Obviously, you can find me on ScreenRant, where most of my writing now is in reviews and in books coverage. You can also find me on Threads, which is my main social media site, where it's Rose Graceling-Moore author, where I'm promoting some upcoming books as well.
Amazing. Lots to look forward to in Rose's world in 2026. Shaun, for you, where can the people find you and what do you got cooking up on ScreenRant.com?
They can find me also on Threads at Lealos, Lealos. So that's where I'm usually at, where I'm posting stuff. Other than that, I can be found writing anything about movies on ScreenRant. I do classic movies, new movies, superhero stuff. I love everything. So you can find me always publishing something on ScreenRant. So
amazing. And as for myself, I'm Liam Crowley. You can find me on all socials, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, most active on Instagram at Liam T. Crowley. For ScreenRant, we're doing a lot of fun interviews and events coverage throughout the year, but in terms of January specifically, Star Trek Starfleet Academy, those interviews will be dropping very soon if you're a fan of Star Trek. And time of recording today, I just got done talking with Ben Affleck and Matt Damon for their new film, The Rip, coming to Netflix very, very soon. We have a great chat. We talk about not only that film, not only their bond as partners, but celebrating cinema as a whole, because we're getting some really, really good releases in recent memory. And it's really special to get to celebrate them with you all here on ScreenRant's Challenge My GOAT. So until next week, we'll see you next time.